The oldest beer bottle in the world doesn't have a label. It doesn't even have beer left inside it. What it has is something much smaller. Chemical traces trapped inside ancient stone and pottery. And those traces tell us something extraordinary. Humans were making fermented drinks thousands of years before breweries, bars, or written recipes existed. But that creates a much stranger question. Who was the first human to discover that a strange-smelling, fermented liquid was actually worth drinking? There is no ancient document describing the first sip. No archaeologist will ever find the person who invented alcohol. The evidence is far more mysterious than that. We have to reconstruct the story from things that survived: ancient grains, stone vessels, pottery jars, microscopic residues, and chemical signatures left behind after the original drink disappeared. But the story may begin even before humans started making alcohol intentionally. Fermentation is not a human invention. It happens naturally. When fruit becomes extremely ripe, wild yeast begins consuming its natural sugars and producing ethanol. A fallen piece of fruit can therefore contain small amounts of alcohol without anyone deliberately making it. This may have mattered to our primate ancestors millions of years ago. One influential idea, known as the drunken monkey hypothesis, suggests that primates may have developed an attraction to the smell of ripe and mildly fermented fruit because it could lead them toward energy-rich food. If that idea is correct, our relationship with alcohol may have started as a side effect of something much more basic: finding food. But eating fermented fruit accidentally is not the same as brewing beer. At some point, humans began taking control of the process. And one of the most fascinating clues comes from a cave in what is now northern Israel. Around 13,000 years ago, people belonging to the Natufian culture used Reykjavik cave. They were hunter-gatherers living during a period of enormous change. Agriculture was beginning to emerge, but these people had not yet become the fully settled farmers we usually picture when we think about ancient civilizations. Inside the cave, archaeologists discovered stone mortars. Researchers found evidence suggesting that grains were processed and fermented there, possibly producing a beer-like beverage. That discovery created a problem for the traditional story. We normally imagine beer appearing after agriculture. First, humans grow grain, then they settle down, then they make beer. But what if the order wasn't that simple? What if people were already experimenting with fermented drinks while they were still living as hunter-gatherers? And that possibility becomes even more interesting when we look at why people gathered. Reykjavik cave wasn't simply a kitchen. Evidence suggests it was also connected with burial and ritual activity. If fermented beverages were being prepared there, alcohol may have been part of communal ceremonies rather than something people consumed casually every evening. That matters because alcohol may have been less about getting drunk and more about bringing people together. Think about what happens when a group shares a special meal. People talk, they celebrate, they make alliances, they exchange stories and information. Outsiders can become friends. A fermented drink could become part of that social experience. And then, thousands of years later, archaeologists discovered another place that makes the story even more complicated. Göbekli Tepe. Built roughly 11,000 years ago in southeastern Turkey, the site contains enormous T-shaped stone pillars carved with animals such as snakes, foxes, birds, and other creatures. The scale of the construction is astonishing considering the technology available to the people who built it. They had no steel cranes, no engines, no modern construction equipment, yet they organized enormous amounts of human labor. For years, archaeologists have debated exactly why these structures were built. But evidence from the wider region suggests that large communal feasts and the preparation of fermented beverages may have been part of these gatherings. If alcohol was involved, then something fascinating was happening. People weren't simply discovering a drink. They were creating social occasions around the drink. And that may have been more important than the alcohol itself. Because once humans began gathering in larger groups, they needed reasons to cooperate. They needed rituals. They needed celebrations. They needed ways to turn strangers into communities. Food could do that. And alcohol may have helped. But the evidence doesn't stop in the Middle East. Travel east, And another ancient clue appears at Jiahu in central China. Archaeologists discovered pottery vessels dating back roughly 9,000 years. Chemical analysis of residues inside the vessels revealed evidence consistent with a fermented beverage made from ingredients including rice, honey, and fruit. This wasn't simply one accidental jar of spoiled food. Someone had learned that different ingredients could be combined, left to ferment, and transformed into something completely different. And that is the moment alcohol becomes truly interesting. Because humans weren't just drinking what nature happened to produce anymore. They were learning how to reproduce nature's chemistry. Grain could become beer. Grapes could become wine. Honey could become mead. Ordinary ingredients could be transformed through an invisible biological process that humans couldn't see or understand at the microscopic level. They didn't know about yeast. They didn't know about microorganisms. They didn't know the chemistry behind fermentation. But they knew one thing. If you did it the right way, something happened. And once that knowledge entered human culture, it spread. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer became deeply connected with daily life. In Egypt, beer became part of food systems, religious practices, and worker rations. Across the ancient Mediterranean, wine became increasingly important. Alcohol was no longer simply an unusual substance found in nature. It had become part of civilization. And that creates a fascinating possibility. Maybe humans didn't simply invent alcohol after civilization. Maybe fermentation was one of the many technologies that helped humans become more social, more settled, and more connected. But we should be careful. There is no solid evidence proving that humans invented agriculture because they wanted beer. That's an attractive idea, and some researchers have argued for versions of it, but agriculture had many powerful advantages, including reliable food production and population growth. Still, alcohol may have played a role in this story, because the archaeological record suggests something remarkable. Humans were experimenting with fermentation incredibly early. And the exact first drink? We'll probably never know. It might have started with a piece of fruit left on the ground. A container forgotten in the heat. A handful of grain mixed with water. Or perhaps someone simply tasted something strange and decided not to throw it away. Then came another experiment. And another. Until an accidental chemical reaction became a human technology. Thousands of years later, we've turned that discovery into breweries, vineyards, distilleries, celebrations, ceremonies, and entire industries. But the underlying process hasn't changed. Sugar, yeast, time, fermentation. So the next time you see a bottle of beer or a glass of wine, remember that you're looking at the modern version of an extremely old human experiment. We don't know who took the first drink. We don't know exactly why they did it. And we may never know whether the first sip was an accident or a deliberate experiment. But somewhere deep in human history, someone discovered that nature could transform ordinary food into something entirely different. And instead of asking, "What happened to this?" they apparently asked the more important question, "Can we make it happen again?"